Welcome back to another episode of Combating Cancer. I am so glad you guys are here. My name is Gwen Kelly and I am your host. Before I start off this episode today, I want to thank our corporate sponsor, Acid HR. So a little bit of background information about me for my first-time listeners is I was diagnosed with stage 3 astrocytoma brain cancer at 19. And the purpose of this podcast is to create a platform where people that are either going through a remission, active treatment, or have lost a loved one can come on and talk about their experiences and raise awareness on all different types of cancer because no one fights alone. So today I have Sue Dettinger here. She's going to talk about her son, JD, that unfortunately passed away when he was 22 to brain cancer. Welcome, Sue.
Hello. It's good to be here.
I know. I'm so happy you're here. When my mom reached out to me and said you were interested, I was excited to talk to you.
Yes, I know sometimes it's not the easiest thing to talk about folks that have left us, but I always think that it's a gift to do that. So I'm happy to be able to share about JD today.
So I would just love to know a little bit about JD's life before cancer. What was he doing? Was he in school? Just tell me all about your son.
Well, we were the normal family up to when JD was 19 years old. So before that, we live here in Farmington, Minnesota, and my husband and I both graduated from high school together locally. 2 kids, Jacob, that we call JD, and then his younger brother, Lucas. So super active kids, did lots of things, but where JD excelled was he was an extraordinary musician.
Really?
So he was involved pretty much in anything, but up to the high school, he was a master percussionist. He could play virtually anything. He played spoons one time and anything in between. So music, he was an Eagle Scout.
Okay.
He was involved in scouting, but for the most part, his focus was music. Was extraordinary at our high school. And when he graduated, he was chosen and was able to get into the music education program at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire.
Oh, wow.
So he was there, he was in the percussion studio, really was his goal to end up teaching, but had an extraordinary amount of experiences. He was amazing. So everything was kind of normal, and he was a great kid. JD was a horrible liar.
That's good for you.
Whether it was when he was 6, his brother is a really good liar, so you never knew quite with him. But JD, he wore it always on his face. He was just sweet, and as a kid, he didn't get away with much because it just wasn't in his nature. So did great, graduated from high school, went to college. He was in his sophomore year of college. And honestly, the story that, we all relate to and think about, had a headache, which was unique for him. Came home one weekend, had a headache, tried to conquer that, ended up taking him to the doctor. And they're like, listen, he's a young, slim, fit kid. And I think with all those things in mind, they think a lot about hormones, and sometimes it can give you a headache. So gave him a treatment for that, gave him a shot, and seemed to do better. Sunday night, went back to college, and we were blessed that his girlfriend and he were at the same college together. Monday morning, woke up after going back on Sunday, and it wasn't any better, it was worse.
Okay.
So we were on the phone with them, and his girlfriend Liz said he's just no better. I think he's worse. And so I said, get him back here.
Yep.
Eau Claire's only an hour and a half. So that was a good thing. They came back. I was lucky to get an appointment with our GP. And we've known him for quite some time. And I remember being at that appointment and just describing what we were experiencing, not only his headache, but some other unique things. He had a little bit of a shiver.
Okay.
And so as we described that to the doctor, I could read on his face that he felt like something's not quite right here.
And then when that was happening, what was going through your mind at that moment?
One of the things that I absolutely clearly recall was it was one of the only times I've ever called a doctor by his first name.
Okay.
I looked at him and I said, Scott, something's wrong.
Yeah.
So
No, that just sent shivers down my arms.
I know. I remember very clearly saying, Scott, something's wrong. Who calls their doctor by the first name? Anyway, I could tell he knew it too. So he did some blood work. And then the next morning he had him scheduled for a CT, and that CT was scheduled at like 7:30 in the morning, but we knew it was really early. So got through that night and, just kind of made him comfortable with that headache and whatever. Went to the CT. It was JD and I and his girlfriend. My husband was actually out of town, but just from what I described, he's like, we're going to drive back tonight.
Okay.
Just so that
just in case.
The things you remember, right?
Yep.
So we did the CT, local hospital, and then you leave because they'll call you and let you know after they take a look at it. So from the hospital to our house, it's about maybe 20 minutes. And when we walked in the door, our phone was ringing. They had tried to, JD was 18 at the time.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
They tried to call him, but, typical JD didn't have his phone on. So they ended up getting a hold of my husband, who was on the road.
Okay.
But they couldn't tell him anything. So he then connected us. So we were doing a three-way
call.
Yeah, at that time. That was the time. I do remember that our doctor was out of town. So they got any doctor in that clinic who that poor lady had to call and say, I need you to get back here. And I said, oh, where do you want us to go? To the clinic? I mean, we had no idea. And she said, no, I want you to go to the emergency room. And so that's what we did. And I remember clearly at that time, the panic kind of look on JD's face and his girlfriend Liz. We just took a deep breath, and that's when it all started.
So you went to the emergency room, and how did that kind of play out when you walked in?
It was interesting. They knew we were coming.
Yep.
Right? So they put us in a room and said, there's some wheels here that we're going to get in motion. And I remembered one of the emergency doctors said, have you seen the scan yet? And I said, no, we haven't. And he said, well, we'll bring in a copy of the scan so you can actually see it. And then they told us that they didn't have a neurosurgeon on staff at this hospital. And I thought, we're in trouble.
Yep.
So we're going to transfer you. And I said, oh, okay. Are we going to, because we were at the Ridges in Birdsville.
Yep.
I said, are we going to Southdale then? Or what? They said, no, we're going to transfer you to the University of Minnesota. And then I thought, again.
Yeah.
We did see the scan.
Okay.
JD had about a golf ball sized tumor in the very center of his brain. And it was right smack dab near the thalamus gland, which is what controls, so much of what happens in our brain. So, I talk about that easily today, but at the time we really didn't recognize and understand what
it's kind of one of those things, right? Where you're like getting thrown all these phrases that you can barely pronounce. Yeah. And then down the line, you're like, oh yeah, that's X, Y, and Z. This controls da-da-da-da-da. Because, unfortunately, you get a little bit too informed on that.
Yeah. You become an expert at some things that you don't ever want to have to become an expert at. But yeah, they showed us those scans and put some wheels in motion, transferred him by ambulance.
Okay.
I thought we were going to drive him.
Yep.
I said, nope, he's going by ambulance because, they did.
So did you ride with him in the ambulance?
My husband rode with him. His girlfriend and I kind of drove in the car in complete and utter silence because we didn't know what was happening. They admitted him directly to the neurointensive care floor. We did not go to the emergency room at the U. We went directly to the floor. And the reason that JD was having headaches was because that tumor was blocking the flow of his spinal fluid that goes around in your head. They call it, rabbit ears in your head when you look at a scan because you have to have these pools.
Yep.
And his pools were gone. There was no place for that fluid to go. So the pressure in his head was what was causing those headaches. So what they had to do within the next 24 hours or so was they had to put a monitor in so that they could monitor the pressures in his head until they could get in there and do something.
Now, kind of, what was his reaction to this entire thing? Were you just kind of, you and your husband have a conversation outside the room while he's kind of getting hooked up to these monitors, and we're like, hey, we gotta come up with a game plan right here. How are we gonna react to him? Or it was pretty out open for us. I mean, listen, there were tears and there was panic. But, the one thing about JD that I would say is he wasn't ever really that outwardly concerned and upset. There were times down the road where that came.
But at that time, he was always searching our faces to be able to measure, what does this mean? Because I can see it all over the faces of my parents and the people that are around me. But yet he still processed that with, such light that,
That's amazing.
hindsight is just amazing for a kid that was that age.
I always say it's kind of interesting because obviously I did get diagnosed at 19, different type of brain tumor.
Yeah.
But if you're out there living your best life, you're going away to school, you're doing the things you love, and then all of a sudden everything changes in a blink of an eye, and you're not so worried about yourself, but you're more worried about like, okay, how am I going to make sure everyone else in my life is okay?
So true.
And it's just so interesting how all of a sudden there's this like flip that switches.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't care about myself. I just want to make sure like my parents, like his girlfriend, like that they're all good.
That was so much
feel
JD.
secure.
Yeah. It was so much him. He was always searching to make sure that everybody else was okay. And I don't know. That was just the nature of the way that he was at that time.
So then right after that, did they say, hey, we need to get surgery going?
Yeah. So the goal from there, and if you look at, his whole history of the way that treatment went, was his first surgery was to do the initial biopsy. His tumor was in a place where you weren't going to get any of it.
Yep.
It was just too risky. The only thing that we could do was try to treat it. So they did do the biopsy, and the biopsy went fine. Got enough to tell us that what he was diagnosed with was, stage 4 glioblastoma.
Yep.
Which it doesn't get any worse than that. We tried purposely in the beginning not to look at the diagnosis or the life expectancy, but that one is one that says you are about 100% guaranteed to not survive. So we knew that. So then it became a game of what do we do, right, to survive. So biopsy first, treatment after that. So oral chemotherapy, which I always giggle because when that medication comes and it's in a bag and it has the sign on it that says don't touch it, but you should swallow it, is fascinating to me. So he did that, did a round of radiation. So that oral chemo, the round of radiation. Throughout this, just with the changes, he did end up with at least 2 more surgeries. He did end up with permanent shunts. They did one surgery where they actually poked a hole between the chambers of fluid that are in the brain to try to get it to drain correctly. That only lasted for a certain amount of time. So they ended up putting in 2 shunts that he got at 2 different times. JD survived long enough that when the tumor started to kind of act up again, they did end up doing a second round of radiation.
Okay.
Can't do that too close together, but he had at least a year
In between. Yep.
So we did a little bit more aggressive of a round of radiation at that time as well. So that was kind of the beginning part. And then as it evolved, we ended up participating in a couple of clinical trials. Mm-hmm. One was a medication-based clinical trial, and it didn't do very much. So we did that for a short period of time and kind of left that there. And then as stuff really started to progress, JD was qualified for compassionate care for a clinical trial that a lot of people in the brain tumor and brain cancer world hear about, and it's where they inject a virus into the brain around the tumor, hoping that that virus considers the tumor something that it should react to. And that was the last treatment option that we utilized for JD, and that happened towards the end of 2020.
Okay.
So,
I mean, just a lot of treatment, a lot of different options that you guys had to go through.
Yeah, one of the things I would say about JD though that we always like to try to tell everybody is we were so lucky though, because in between treatments or in between shunts and surgeries and everything else, JD did really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
Is it bad to say, we never felt like he suffered.
No, that's not bad to say at all.
We never really felt like he suffered, because even though he did radiation, it caused fatigue, or even though he had surgery and then he had to deal with that healing and everything that went with it, and the chemotherapy wasn't totally terrible for him, He didn't lose a lot of hair.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to look like he lost a lot of hair because he didn't want to look like a cancer patient. But he really did well in between all those things. And because he did well, he had opportunities. We were able to give him some opportunities that were amazing during his time. He got sent on a fly-in fishing trip someone paid for.
Wow.
The Minnesota Outdoor Adventure Foundation and an organization called Tethered sent him on an elk hunting trip with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got to do that, and he got to go to a concert that he always wanted to go to. I love that story too, because they wanted to go see Maroon 5, and it was an afterthought of maybe we should try to get tickets. Well, then we saw someone on Facebook Marketplace that was selling tickets. So I contacted them and, hey, yep, can I send my son and his girlfriend to pick these up? Well, that person, as some of us do in Facebook Marketplace world, they always check you out. And they realized from looking at my profile what was happening.
Yeah.
And they gave $400 worth of tickets to my kid and never knew who he was before then, but wouldn't let him pay.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that amazing?
That's
how
amazing.
People are? But yeah, he really got to do such extraordinary things. And I realized that with some people, you don't have that opportunity. You have to be well enough to do it. I have a family that I know whose 9-year-old little boy just got diagnosed with cancer, and it's so hard, the things they're having to do with him. And all we got to do is try to get him to his Make-A-Wish trip. But we got to make sure he's well enough to do it. And we never had that issue with JD. He was always well enough. We got great experiences. And for that, we're very, very thankful.
I mean, that's so amazing, the fact that JD was living his life to the fullest.
We can even be lucky and thankful, even in the midst of all this yuckiness.
As we had kind of mentioned before, that JD passed away when he was 22. If you feel open to talking about it, how were those last couple days? Did you know that it was coming soon? What were the doctors saying?
Yeah, so JD was 19 when he was diagnosed.
Yep.
So we had 30 months with him. You heard me say that, as things started to progress, our last ditch effort was that clinical trial where they used the virus. And so that surgery he went in for, and that was during COVID too. It was kind of close to the tail end of COVID, but there were still restrictions at the hospital. So they told us, well, only one person could go in. So we made the decision. We had JD's girlfriend go in with him. And the surgery happened. But that, when they inject that virus, it kind of, in simple words and terms, it causes a storm in your head, because it takes your entire immune system and kicks it into gear. And when that happens, so many things can occur. And it caused an enormous amount of inflammation, and it affected everything that JD did. So his walk was affected, his speech was affected in the very beginning. So much so that they decided to stop the treatment. I do remember having a conversation he happened to be the chair of the neurosurgery department at the U at the time. And right before that surgery, he said, Sue, I don't want to do it. I did it on another patient, and they regretted it because it turned the time that they had left into something different. So I had a hard conversation with JD about that. And we talked, and he said, Mom, I got to try it, because if I don't, I'll never know if it would work. And if I don't try it, how would we know if it would work for someone else? Which I love.
So selfless.
Right? Which I loved, because, when you're 22 years old, to be able to have kind of that insight. So I had to talk that neurosurgeon into doing this. And you know what? Dr. Chen, he wants to do it, and I'm not going to take that away from him. I promise we won't, give you a heck. We're not going to regret it.
Yep.
We just got to try. So they did. It was hard. They ended up stopping it. And then we had to make some plans to bring him home. So in 24 hours, we had the basement of our house, or the lower level, turned into the right space for him. A big hospital bed. We made it super cool because his girlfriend was going to stay there with him as well. And big screen TV and all the things that went with it. And then we set up hospice because it's extraordinary what they can do and the amount of support they give you, no matter how much time you're dealing with. And so we met with them and brought JD home. And in the very beginning, he did well, but you could tell that he was getting tired and it was affecting him differently. He couldn't walk without us using a transfer belt and helping him with that. And, my husband and I are 5'6", don't know how I got a 6-foot tall dude, but it was interesting. And we had a whole lot of laughs that go with that. There's other things that you don't really realize as things change, right? He was in a hospital bed, but one night we heard all this commotion and went running downstairs, and he had tumbled out of bed because he had lost his balance. His girlfriend was with him as well, right? And we were giggling because we're like, JD, what are you doing? He goes, I don't know. I just fell out of bed. So, we dealt with those things. And honestly, here's what else I would describe, because I have had people ask me about this. He just got tired and he would sleep more. And we were scheduled to go see Dr. Neal again. And we knew that that wasn't the right thing to do. So we called Dr. Neal and said, I don't think bringing him in to see you is going to make any difference. There isn't a treatment that we could start again. And she said, this is the kindness of a neuro-oncologist. She said, I probably would have put him on hospice a week before, but they always are so gracious to give us time to do what made the most amount of sense for us. A week before that, we weren't ready to hear that. So he just kind of got tired, and we recognized all the right things, right? We had our pastor and our priest come over and kind of do that. And we did talk to JD. We did go tell him that we talked to Dr. Neal, and she said, maybe we'll just take a break on some treatment. We talked to him a little bit differently. If it was me, I would have expected somebody to say, Sue, listen, this is probably the end of the line for us. But JD didn't need to hear that. I think he already knew anyway. So we just said, we're going to take a break. And he nodded and said that was okay. And then we just kind of worked through it. I would say it was only about 3 more days. So we stayed there 24 hours a day. Liz, his girlfriend, was with us. Her parents were there. Our very good friends that were with us, we called it the A-team. The Swansons were there, and we all took turns. In that lower level, we had couches and beds, and there was always someone sleeping in that room. Hospice set us up accordingly, and you work through all the end-of-life stuff. It's the right medications to make sure he's comfortable. And he fell asleep. That was it. And we were all absolutely there at the end with him. And, I was thinking about this before I came today, too. I think there are still so many days where I look at this and I go, what the hell just happened, right?
Was it all a bad dream?
Oh.
It's a nightmare. When am I going to wake up?
It's still some days so amazing. And to the point where we kind of look at each other sometimes and go, did that honest to God just happen? What happened? Because we weren't that family.
Yep.
And then we were that family. So I think that even that process, if you've never been through the process of someone dying, but when it's, from my perspective, when it's someone dying and it's your kid, it's a whole different thing. It's just different. I always say that, parents that have gone through something like this with their kids or have lost kids should be in charge of the world, because our perspective is so much different than everything and anyone else's. And it's hard to kind of put weight on that, but it is. You've gone through something like that, and it's not like anything else you've ever experienced in your whole life. I hope that that so many people don't have to experience that. It is one thing that we know is, listen, we know we're that family, and we've had this experience, but I just pray to God nobody else has to go through this.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that isn't the case, but everybody, we hope the majority of people do not. So,
Wow. That was just, you had me tearing up here a little bit. This one hits especially close to home to me.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I wanted to start this whole thing. Because you and your family know better than others, too, that the funding for brain cancer research is little to nothing.
Yeah.
And you guys fought tooth and nail to the end. And I just think you guys are absolutely courageous, and just the fact that you're willing to come on here and just share JD's story. It's just absolutely amazing the way, your face lights up when you talk about him, and you have all these memories with him that you bring up. And I'm sure each time you listen to some music and you hear the drums in the background, you think of him. And it takes so much strength to be able to sit here and talk about him with a smile.
Yeah.
And remember all the good times. And even when he was going through treatment, you've only picked out the good and happy moments with him, which I've noticed. Because, that's what sticks with you. The good stuff sticks with you.
Yeah. Hindsight, it's going to be almost 5 years now since JD passed. And part of the perspective of it is realizing that, we don't move on, but we move forward. And as you move forward, your perspective ends up being much different. And listen, we have still horrible days, good days, bad days, good moments and bad moments, but we still have amazing experiences and opportunities to remember JD, to talk about JD. I think everybody needs to understand and remember. Listen, any opportunity we get to talk about them and to represent them and to remember them is everything to us. Now, listen, we might not get through that without a tear or two, right? I always used to say to everybody that, sometimes folks aren't comfortable being around that because they think that our sad's going to rub off on them, right? Which might initially be true depending on their personalities. But really, any opportunity we get to really talk about them and to do right by them and the fact that they were here is so drastically important because of everyone's graciousness to us in all of this. I think one of the other things I would say to everybody listening is if you ever go through something like this, the instance itself, the cancer, the illness, the whatever it is overwhelming enough. But one thing that was amazingly overwhelming for us was how much support you get, where that support comes from. People that want to chip in and give money or experiences or bring food, and to a point you are overwhelmed by that alone, right? But everybody wants so desperately to do something, anything.
Yep.
And what we have to realize at a certain point is you let them.
Yep.
Right? Because it's all anybody can do. And so we did that with JD. We were blessed with so many different things. Because of that, one of the things that we do is here in a couple of weeks, we get to give JD's scholarship out that we do every year at Farmington High School. It goes to a student that represents all of the best qualities that we thought JD had, and a student who's majoring in some type of music. So once a year, we get to hear them talk about JD when they give this award. And it's a wonderful thing for us
amazing.
To be able to do. So,
wow, I just love that, you just keep his legacy going all the time. Just, it's absolutely amazing. I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your story, sharing his story, and you're just absolutely unbelievable. And everything that I've heard about JD, he just sounds like he was one of the best people ever.
he was a great kid.
I know, obviously, these are hard conversations, but I mean, these conversations need to be had. They do.
Yeah.
That is the end of our episode for Combating Cancer. Thank you so much to everyone who was listening today. I highly encourage you guys to share this amazing conversation that I had today with Sue about JD to anyone that you know. It was just such a pleasure to be able to speak with her. And if you or someone you know would like to come on and share their own story, please feel free to contact me. And I also wanted to give Acid HR a final shout out. Thank you so much for being a corporate sponsor. And if anyone else is interested in being a corporate sponsor, please feel free to email me. Well, that is all I have for today, but I will chat with you guys next Wednesday.